august gathering. I am so ridiculously unprepared for this, it's not funny. But I'm going to begin with an example that might seem a bit redundant. As the course of the debate goes, you're going to understand its prevalence with relation to the topic. Because nationalism as a form of political mobilization is not opposed to natural human rights, is a topic, is a motion so vague in itself that every single motion, every single point of dissection can have various different definitions. When you look at nationalism, you have to understand that nationalism differs from nationalism as a form of political mobilization. If a soldier stands at Kargil and he's been given an order by his official to shoot, if he's been given an order to shoot at Pakistanis without any reason, that might count as nationalism. If he's been given an order to shoot to protect the Indians behind the masses, behind the borders of the country, it could count as nationalism as a form of political mobilization. Nationalism as a form of political mobilization by itself is not opposed to natural human rights. This brings me to the second segment of dissecting the topic, which is how human rights and natural human rights differ with each other. Natural human rights is something you acquire at birth, right? It's something that cannot be taken away from you by the very legitimate fact that you have been born. Human rights stem from some kind of a doctrine.
Point of information.
Comes from, not right now, thank you. Human rights, on the other hand, have to have some substantial basis of a doctrine of where you are born, of the community you are born in, of where you are brought up, and the societal norms which, outline the natural human rights that you have been gifted with. When you look at nationalism as a form of political mobilization, you're basically saying that natural human rights can be protected by the very lieu that human rights that have been protected by nationalism are included in that doctrine.
Point of information.
Yes, please.
So how does side proposition today differentiate between patriotism and nationalism? Because I think you've got the two mixed up.
Alright, thank you. First of all, I'm not distinguishing between patriotism and nationalism. I am distinguishing between nationalism and nationalism as a form of political mobilization. Nationalism by itself might include a lot of aspects of patriotism, which may mean going overboard in respect to your country, for your country, but as a form of political mobilization, nationalism as a concept is understood to mean that it's supposed to bring harmonious coexistence together without bringing harm outside the borders of the doctrine that nationalism is within itself, covered in. The cons of this debate are much easier, so I'm going to go with some pros, right? So, the right to have a free will to think or to have an allegiance to an ideology is a natural way of life and a natural right. And hence, so is political mobilization around the same lines.
Point of information.
Not right now, thank you. Secondly, all political mobilization in a democracy is a form of collective bargaining around society or the societal structure that we belong to. Basically, political mobilization refers to a shared belief of collective interest. It has nothing to do with the concept of patriotism crossing the lines, because there is a very fine line of distinction between nationalism and between fundamentalism fundamentalism that can often take the form of majoritarianism. For example, many of the people that do not support eating beef in India often said that beef should not be eaten because Hindu is the dominant religion in India, and Hindus do not eat beef, and that's why we should not eat beef, and they blame this on nationalism. This is not nationalism, this is fundamentalism. What we aim to do today is differentiate between fundamentalism, nationalism and majoritarianism, all of which circumscribe patriotism. Coming to my pros, the second one, as I was saying, is that society and societal structure are based on the right to self-preservation, safety and coexistence around accepted rules or norms of behavior versus the law of jungle nationalism, which is hence another valid form to further the cause of the self. The rights of majority to align cannot be viewed as negative, assuming only that the minorities have a way of right to promote their causes, because self-preservation in a way is kind of reverse discrimination, which we are forever rallying around the underdog. Sometimes small groups have also used the nationalistic mobilization for self-preservation, and it is the perception of political mobilization around nationalism that impinges the natural rights of individuals or groups, which find a more productive sense of self when they're actually thinking of themselves as nationalists rather than nationalists which support political mobilization. Political mobilization around nationalism, like in India around the values of independence, harmony, coexistence and secularism, has been a very effective means to restore the human right of freedom and free will, as has been the case of so many times in history, from the French Revolution to modern day, to overthrow homogeneous rulers or colonial rulers or dictators. Fact of the matter is, the definition of nationalism differs from what it did 20 years ago. Nationalism in the era of Julius Caesar meant serving for your ruler irrespective of what your own personal opinions are. Nationalism as a form of political mobilization means bringing together people in such a way that their political thoughts are in harmonious coexistence, so that they believe what they're doing is for the collective good and not for the country, just for a purpose that doesn't exist. Thank you.
Everyone, today I find myself speaking for side or opposition in this debate. Now, to begin with, today what side proposition have offered us, ladies and gentlemen, is a case and supporting examples which are oh so rosy, if not completely utopian and unrealistic in nature. Side proposition today would have us believe that nationalism and its derivatives perhaps are the purest force of mankind, with only the best of mankind at its heart. And I quote Arundhati Roy here, ladies and gentlemen, nationalism of one kind or another was the cause of most of the genocide of the 20th century. Something I shall elaborate on later in my address, but something side proposition simply failed to acknowledge. Side opposition today also realizes that today's topic of discussion revolves around four central elements. That is, the meaning of nationalism, the principle of political mobilization, the concept of natural rights, and how the existence of the latter is compromised when the first two are in full practice. In my address today, ladies and gentlemen, I shall explain to you why the proposed motion violates the right of life, and how nationalism plays a huge role in the initiating and the playing out of
POI, sir.
Not right now, sir. And the playing out of war. Something my second and third speaker shall build on with the help of examples. Apart from dissecting the motion, the House today finds itself divided on. By definition, ladies and gentlemen, nationalism is a shared group feeling in the significance of a geographical independence, seeking some sort of, reparation for
POI, sir.
for its culture or ethnicity that holds the group together. Yes, sir.
You said nationalism is the primary cause of genocide. Would you also concede that the lack of nationalism and disunity, for example, in the case of India, is also the cause of colonialism? Or a reason that colonialism succeeds so much?
Sir, I think what you've mistaken nationalism for, sir, is a derivative. Colonialism is a derivative of nationalism, something you should be defending, not me. The idea of nationalism can also be expressed as a belief or political ideology that involves an individual identifying with or becoming attached to his or her nation. Just a quick clarification, ladies and gentlemen, something side proposition should have waited for. Contrary to popular belief, a nation, unlike a nation state, is a cultural political community that has become conscious of its unity and particular interests and now thus seeks sovereignty. For example, the Maoist community in the regions of Telangana, West Bengal and Jharkhand, though not recognized to have a separate nation state, have become conscious of their unity and particular concerns, which has resulted in their demand for a separate nation state in their region of occupation, which has not been approved yet. However, any feeling of identification these people have with the proposed province will be referred to as nationalism. In an effort to mobilize forces in order to generate public approval, these demands have often turned violent, resulting in the assassination of many IPS officers over the past few years.
POI, sir?
No, thank you, sir. And the death of thousands of civilians. And I'm not even going to mention the hundreds of agitations this region has experienced over the past 30 years, resulting in more than 12,000 lives lost. Now, human life, ladies and gentlemen, is not merely animal existence, but is defined as the holistic state of well-being an individual experiences when in a peaceful environment while experiencing no threat to his or her own existence. In an environment like the one which has been generated by nationalism or its derivatives, which I've highlighted in these Naxal-prone regions, caused due to the political mobilization of nationalism, an individual faces not only a constant threat to his existence,
POI, sir?
No, thank you, sir. But the peaceful state of his surroundings is also compromised. This, we believe, ladies and gentlemen, violates the right to life of an individual. Now to come to the second substrand of my argument. This I would like to establish with an example. In the year 1976, a small island nation state was torn apart when a group of renegades upset when the government refused to implement any affirmative action to help their community mobilized public and political support to declare war on the state. A war which lasted for 33 years till the fateful killing of the leader. I'll take your point now, sir, if you don't mind.
You talked a lot about Maoists. Won't you agree that Maoists are united by their political ideology instead of their belief of themselves as one culturally homogeneous group?
Again, ladies and gentlemen, nationalism, as I have defined, does not have to adhere to a nation state. A nation, also as I have defined, it does not need to be recognized by any political body. This something is side proposition fails to recognize. Now about the little island nation state I was referring to. It featured a war which lasted 33 years till the fateful killing of the leader of the renegades. The leader, V. Prabhakaran. The group, LTTE. And the nation state, Sri Lanka. With the LTTE demanding a new nation state, Tamil Eelam. This tiny island nation state faced a terrible civil war for over 3 decades, which was caused due to political mobilization of the ideals of nationalism. A civil war which stretched on for over 3 decades and resulted in the loss of thousands of lives and caused a huge economic burden on Sri Lanka's otherwise promising economy. This has only been one case, ladies and gentlemen. Many more, such as Hitler causing the Holocaust with his ideology of National Socialism, Robespierre using the feeling of nationalism to his favor by mobilizing the public to overthrow the French Emperor and establishing the reign of terror, and Stalin ruling Soviet Russia with a very firm hand behind the Iron Curtain, have surfaced repeatedly through history and more often than not have left marks which will be hard to forget. Which is why side opposition today fears of anarchy, dissension, and outright rebellion if side proposition's argument were to be followed. Let us not make the same mistakes we have in the past, ladies and gentlemen. Let us not allow nationalism to associate itself with the ideas of political mobilization, because it has, over the years, many times proliferated natural human rights. Let us not make the same mistakes we've had before. Let us protect the right to life and prevent any further wars from happening in the future. With that in mind, I beg to oppose.
I would like to begin by doing you, my worthy audience, a great service. The speaker before me spoke about how nationalism is basically the devil's spawn itself, and how the only thing it can result in is wars, and how much bloodshed it has caused, and how it's really the worst thing that can happen to our human rights. But I want to ask him, have you, sir, heard of a man called Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi? Our nation was freed on the principles of nationalism, on the principles of non-violence. So the opposition bringing up the fact that nationalism is the most violent ideal that exists and that it is definitely opposed to our natural human rights completely violates the fact that we got independence and freedom because of nationalism and because of non-violence, which was incorporated as a part of that nationalism. So nationalism is not defined properly, ladies and gentlemen. If you search on the internet, which we were desperately trying to do, nationalism has no stoic definition. It's an extremely fluid term. It can be used information. 1 minute, sir. When Edward Snowden leaks secrets of his country to his people, that is also nationalism, because that is personal nationalism. But now we're talking about nationalism as a form of political mobilization. Nationalism as a form of political mobilization, ladies and gentlemen.
Point of information, madam.
You must understand, 1 minute, sir. You must understand, nobody's being forced to congregate and to fight and to rebel. If someone is doing that, if someone is forming a group, and if someone is raising their voice for their rights, no one's going to just do it for no reason whatsoever, right? So no one's forcing them to congregate. So if the fact that they are voluntarily congregating, how does that oppose their basic human rights? Yes, my opposition may say that, in so many instances it has led to violence, which is of course justified. But more than that, talking about nationalism from a broader perspective.
Point of information?
Yes, ma'am.
You talked about how when people come together, they're only going for their human rights and not against. Aren't they coming together to fight against someone else, and thus isn't it opposing that person's human rights?
Thank you for that question. When your opposition speakers cited the example of Sri Lanka, I don't know, maybe you realized it and for the sake of the debate you didn't bring it to light. But the fact of the matter is, worthy audience, that the uprising in Sri Lanka, the fight for nationalism in Sri Lanka happened because their natural human rights were being violated. And so how can nationalism be against human rights? I'm sure you'll prove that. But in this case, which your opposition speaker cited of Sri Lanka, the nationalism movement started because they were being denied the nationalism, the natural human rights that we're all debating about today. And if that is the case, then how can something that is started to prevent something create that further? Sri Lankans aren't idiots.
Point of information, madam.
Yes.
So, madam, you saying that the Sri Lankans rebelled because their natural rights are being violated, doesn't that contradict your own proposition?
How does it contradict my proposition? My proposition is that nationalism as a form of political mobilization does not contradict. What was the motion? Does not nationalism as a form of political mobilization does not
opposed to human rights.
Opposed to human. Thank you. So how, sir, are you listening to what I'm saying? I'm saying that. How am I contradicting myself? They started a rebellion because they were being denied their natural human rights, which is not what nationalism was denying them. They started the movement of nationalism.
Point of information?
Yes.
Just 3 small yes or no questions. When the Sri Lankans moved against their government to fight for their human rights, was it a political movement? Was it a political movement?
Yes.
Was it on the basis that they could build a better nation, which is nationalism?
That is debatable.
No cross questions, please.
My name is Loxley.
Yes, so to continue, ladies and gentlemen, when the fact that I am free to debate here on this worthy podium today and am allowed to actually share my views with you today was because we got free from colonialism, how can we stand here and say that my basic human right to raise my voice and my basic human right to your basic human right to get information is being violated? We are here essentially today because of nationalism. When we see it in a broader view, the father of our nation, this is the only thing he propagated and saying that is violent. I mean, we must start at a micro level before thinking of America and Sri Lanka and all the island nations. Why not start at the grassroots level, at our own?
Ma'am, point of information.
Actually, no, not right now. So, yes, as I was saying, ladies and gentlemen, nationalism, when they say is violent, can be confused as fundamentalism, can be confused as extremism, and can be confused as radicalism. Nationalism, essentially, is when people congregate voluntarily, as I said before, to get their human rights, to get something they want. And so, nationalism can't possibly deny their human rights because nationalism is not forced on anyone. If I force you to agree to me, if I'm some fundamentalist faith and I force you to agree with me, that is violating your natural human right to have a choice. But when you yourself are saying, yes, you know what, I do believe in your fundamentalist faith, how are you violating any right of yours? Nationalism, ladies and gentlemen, more than this, basically means that you divide the country, and I'm talking about India right now. You divide the country, you divide India on the basis of political parties. These political parties may be like you have a political party which is predominantly Muslim, or a political party which is predominantly Christian, or a political party which is predominantly Hindu. So this does not mean that the weaker sections aren't being represented. Yes, there are some people in the remotest villages of the country who may not have their own large political party to actually fight and contest for actual elections, but that is not nationalism's fault. And the motion of the debate is nationalism as a form of political mobilization does not oppose natural human rights. So the question of minor citizens living in the weaker sections of society of the country not being given representation does not come in question. Because nationalism, at the end of the day, as I said, and I would like to conclude by saying that nationalism does not mean you are nationalist for your country, because it's a very fluid definition. Nationalism, as my first speaker said, when a soldier shoots other citizens because his government has given him that order, that is also his nationalism. And that is not violating his natural human right, because that is his choice to do so. And the most fundamental, basic human right is the right to choice. And the right to life. And
point of information, madam.
Deny it, please. And nationalism does not deny any of these facts because it's a voluntary congregation. Thank you.
So, first of all, I would like to start my arguments by rebutting the points made by the second speaker. They are building upon the concept of India and how Gandhi used nationalism apparently to get India freedom. We need to realize that India did not get freedom due to nationalism. It got freedom due to the people being tired of colonialism. They were anti-colonial. They were not national. It was a process of decolonization, and he used anti-colonial. Alright, yeah, I'm sorry for that. Yeah. Anti-colonial feelings of the people to drive them forward and remove Britishers from the nation. If there was an actual concept of nationalism in there would be no nation state of Pakistan. If everyone was fighting for India, there would be no concept of Pakistan. Even fighting for one nation, India, to get freedom from Britishers, why are you then fighting for Pakistan as well? No, it was a concept of anti-colonialism. So their entire argument falls on that. In addition, you cannot say that nobody forces them to accept your definition of...
Sir, a POI please.
Denied, I'll be taking POIs later.
Okay.
So we need to realize that who defines nationalism? You have a political party in government who can misuse the concept of nationalism to its own purposes. For example, the Bharatiya Janata Party in power today. I, for once, was a supporter because I was tired of the Congress rule. Well, most of us were. But I was supporting the NDA because Mr. Modi was a new wave that promised to get a fresh change in the nation. But the politicians are still playing the dirty politics. Today in India, you are losing the right to dissent because you are equating the speaking out against the governmental policies to speaking out against the nation. That is misuse of nationalism, and I'm not even going to the extreme side. Let's compare it to the other words ending in isms that represent a social group. Nation also, after all, is a gigantic social group.
Sir, a POI please.
I'll be taking that.
Okay, sorry.
So let's talk about other things. Racism, which is a basic belief that your race, the interests of your race must be put forward. Sexism, which is a basic belief that the interests of your sex must be put forward. Communalism, which is a belief that your community's interest must be put forward. So why do you think nationalism is a positive force when all these other similar forces are branded negative by everyone and everyone who's talking about? We need to realize that politics will always be dirty. It uses various tools to gain power in the political sphere, and they ignore entirely what is happening in the nation as a result of what they are doing. We need to realize that if you allow them to use the broad concept of nationalism in political ideologies, you are giving them the ultimate power of controlling the people's minds. Because we need to realize that in a nation, there is no greater force than nationalism. A community is a part of the nation, but nationalism represents the whole nation. And if anybody disagrees with a political party's ideology of nationalism, he will be branded anti-national. So nobody will dare to speak against that, and that party will keep on gaining in the false name of nationalism, and that cannot be allowed. We need to realize that three freedoms are being opposed here: the freedom to dissent, the freedom of speech, and the freedom of voicing your opinion freely. Nationalism as a political tool has always harmed the society. Let's realize that Adolf Hitler, after the pacts, I am forgetting the name of the pact, after the pacts were made with the other World War I countries that harmed the German people, Hitler used the concept of nationalism by appealing to the people's hearts and using the nation state as a concept that you must fight for your nation. All he was doing was promoting his own ideology. And did the people resist that? No, because if you resist a concept of nationalism that even 10 people are accepting, you are branded anti-nationalist, and then if you're in India, then apparently you will have to go to Pakistan somehow. It is what at least Anupam Seth believes and the BJP supporter believes, or as they're called, bhakts. So, we need to realize that the government can always use nationalism to
Sir, I'm taking the POIs now. This is actually a POI for something that you said in the beginning, is when you said that what I said about how nationalism is not really the fact that India was fighting for colonialism and the Indian people were anti-colonial. Sir, colonialism is a fragment of nationalism.
Now, again, this was again a misuse of colonialism. Now, realize what the Britishers did. You had different states in India. Thank you for your question. I'm sorry for that. Thank you for your question, ma'am. I'm not being rude or anything. But you must realize that when Britishers came to India, how did they unite the nation as one? They used nationalism. They used nationalism to appeal to the people. How did they get the soldiers to fight for them? Because at that time nationalism was defined as a collective good, and as India was part of the complete British Empire, so if Britain was threatened anywhere, Indians were given the moral obligation to fight for them rather than fighting for themselves to free from the Britishers. Indian soldiers, especially the Sikh regiment, is said to be the most fierce warriors that the British ever had. It is often recollected in Italian accounts how Sikhs were a major force in the British victory in North Africa. But why did Sikhs fight for British? We must think of that. Because British appealed to them in the form of nationalism to politically mobilize them and gain advantage themselves. The Sikhs themselves did not stand to gain anything from it. So that is, again, you are helping me defeat you, and I would never mind that. Anyways, so we also need to realize in today's world, where is nationalism being used? North Korea and the ISIS. Now ISIS many do not recognize as a nation state, but it has formed a region where the people are being told that if you are a Muslim or if you support Islam ideology, if you support this region's ideology, you must fight for ISIS. Let's talk about Pakistan. There, the concept of nationalism is actually furthering Pakistan's interest, but somehow it has gone on to mean that to further Pakistan's interest, you must demean India's interests. So terrorists use that form of nationalism.
POI, sir?
Yes, ma'am.
You were talking about words that end with ism. When you talk about how Pakistan wants to demean India's interest because nationalism, that's genoism, not nationalism.
That is?
Genoism, not nationalism.
I can't get it.
Genoism, like
Okay,
jingos, yeah.
Yeah. So, no, what I'm still getting to that, so you could have let me finish and now you wasted your POI. So we need to realize how in Pakistan the terrorist groups are using the concept of nationalism. They say that to promote the interests of Pakistan, you must do bad to India, and that is how they are getting recruits at this time. In North Korea, the dictator is using nationalism as a form. In North Korea, the whole concept of nationalism is so skewed, I will not even talk about it because all of us know that somehow the North Korea dictator does not even need to visit the washroom in the morning. It is an amazing feat for him, indeed. So, leaving everything aside, leaving the world aside, let's talk about India right now. In India, BJP used nationalism in a form that you could have never imagined. If you eat beef, you are anti-national. If you talk bad about Modi ji is awesome. If you say anything other than that, you are anti-national. That was the concept of nationalism. We need to realize that any political party can define nationalism in whatever way they want. And that creates a problem for the society because it disrupts the entire harmony of the society. Everyone who will dissent will be branded anti-nationalism. And I say that we all need to agree that political parties cannot be allowed to use nationalism as a political tool because it is opposed to every natural human right, and we must realize that indeed North Korea's dictator has to visit the washroom in the morning. Thank you.
What, sadly, the opposition has failed to recognize today is that nationalism is like ice cream. It comes in many different flavors. Nationalism is a force which is used to unite on the basis of this concept of a nation, of a cultural identity, of a national identity. Once that process of uniting is over, what you do with those united people, whether like Gandhi, you are leading them on a civil disobedience movement that protests British colonization absolutely peacefully, or whether like Hitler, you are telling them that hey, all of you need to work to make Germany some kind of world-dominating superpower. That is after the process of nationalism is over. So nationalism only works as the way of uniting those people. What you do with them after uniting them is entirely your choice, and as a result, nationalism itself is not opposed to
Point of order,
natural human
point of
rights.
information.
No, sir. Right. They've been coming up with all these points about how nationalism causes genocide.
Points of information.
Firstly, let's look at genocides from the past. Right? You have the Hutu-Tutsi genocide in Rwanda. The reason for that genocide is not nationalism in the sense that because one of those people felt that they wanted to be an independent nation, they decided to inflict some sort of oppression on the others. It was because the Hutus, because of their own existing ethnic feelings, because of long-standing historical biases, felt that the Tutsi were inferior, not because they wanted a nation of their own. So it was they who decided to inflict that pain on the Tutsis, not out of this feeling of we are a nation and they are different from us. It was a feeling that we are better and they are lesser than us. The concept of nation and the concept of race is very, very different, and that is the sort of conflation which the opposition has been trying to make all along today.
Points of information?
I'll take it.
Yeah, I think you've got a little bit confused. The point today is about nationalism as a form of political mobilization. You've kept going on about nationalism. Can you move to the point now?
Yes, because I was told the concept about nationalism, because if you were actually here to talk about nationalism as a form of political mobilization, you won't talk about genocides. Because at the end of the day, when you're inflicting genocide, it's not political mobilization. But moving on to exactly
Point of information?
Political mobilization, not now, sir. When you have, again, we talk about using nationalism as a form of political mobilization in very different ways. So, at one point, they have focused all their arguments on the negative aspect of it. Like they have focused on the saffron flavor of the ice cream, where they talk simply and only about a BJP which tells you you're anti-national and a Sangh Parivar which says you can't eat beef. So when you agree with that and you say that they're right, you're also agreeing to the BJP's definition of nationalism. And that's what I'm telling you not to agree with. Because that force is not nationalism itself. That is a force of religious superiority. That is a force of racism. That is a force which claims that essentially this is a Hindu nation, that this is a Muslim nation. That force is different from the force that says this is an Indian nation.
Point of information?
I'll take that.
Sir, what about a case when if you refuse to eat the saffron ice cream, you are thrown out of the nation?
Yeah, correct. Firstly, that's a very extreme example. People say all this, no one actually throws anyone out of the nation. But when you are thrown out of the nation, you are not thrown out of the nation because of nationalism. You're thrown out of the nation because there are a bunch of people in power who can't bear you, who are very insecure, who are not comfortable about their power, and who come up and say that we will use this nationalism as a crutch. Those people don't get to define nationalism. And when that's the entire argument of the opposition, that nationalism equals the nationalism which is used by people negatively. Our argument as the proposition is that no, nationalism is a broader force. It is a neutral force in that sense. It is a force that binds. And when that binding is done, as I've reiterated throughout my debate, what you do with a unit which you have unified is entirely a different matter.
Point of information?
To nationalism, sure.
Sir, I would like to ask, who in your opinion decides what is nationalism? Is it the court? Is it the government? It is the people? Who decides what is nationalism?
Absolutely, it is the people, right? So it is the people, we are the people, and that's why I am appealing you
Point
to
of
no, thank you, sir. I am appealing to you not to define nationalism as the nationalism of hate or as the nationalism of oppression, but as the nationalism of unity, but as the nationalism of identity. And again, bringing back the point of colonialism, which I don't think you understood really, is that colonialism, the reason it was so successful, right? All of us know this. Because India was so disunited. Because you had this sense of fracturing, because you had this lack of national identity, and when you forged that national identity, be it in the fires of that colonial oppression, when you forged that national identity, that is the national identity which allowed India to rise up from a nation that was shackled by the chains of colonial domination, and allowed India to rise up to its status today. So please don't ignore that form of nationalism as well. Don't assume entirely that nationalism is just and only and simply about the sort of divisive arguments we've used the opposition to use. Right, sure, and again, lots of flawed points have been made by them about points such as ISIS. At the end of the day, ISIS is not a body which is rooted in nationalism. It's factually incorrect. It is a body which is rooted in a vision of religious superiority and of religious extremism. So again, you can't just conflate things which are very, very different
Point of
and put them
information.
together. No, thank you, sir. You cannot take a Maoism and automatically equate it with nationalism, because the goal of the Maoists is not the reason that they want secession is not because of a sense of national identity.
Point of
It is
information.
because of feeling of social injustice which they feel has been wreaked upon them. The reason that the Maoists are there fighting for their rights is not because the Maoists feel that we were born to be a different people. It is because the Maoists feel that we were part of India and India did not serve us that justice.
Point
And
of
that,
information,
as a
sir.
result, today we want some sort of repatriation, reparation for that. Yes, I'll take that.
So why are you assuming that nationalism is always related to a nation state when nationalism actually originated as a feeling among the disgruntled French people in the late 18th century?
Yeah, okay, absolutely wonderful. Firstly, I'm not assuming that nationalism only relates to a nation state. As I said, right, we do have an example of India, of a pre-partition India, which is not per se a nation state in sense, it's a colony, and you still have feelings of nationalism arising there. And I'm really happy you brought up this point of nationalism arising first as a force in French, in the time of the French Revolution, because one of the arguments you seem to make was that nationalism is essentially the root cause of all wars. But if nationalism arose in the French, during the French Revolution, during the 1790s, well, factual point here, ladies and gentlemen, sorry, but war arose way before nationalism did. So this argument here they're making today about how nationalism leads to war is also very flawed. And that leads to, I think, what my final argument is, that nationalism is a divisive force. It does lead to conflict. Again, that conflict might lead to violation of human rights. But nationalism itself is not opposed to natural human rights, and it never will be. Thank you.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. My name's Nadara Yusuf, and I'm going to be the third speaker of the opposition team, reinstating the fact that nationalism, as a form of political mobilization, is opposed to natural human rights. Now, I'm going to go through rebuttal of each speaker turn by turn. I'm not going to be able to rebut the first speaker because she simply defined the topic. There was no actual stance produced there. Secondly, I'm going to now talk about the second speaker's point of view. I feel like the second speaker and even the third speaker failed to understand the point given to us. It's that nationalism, as a form of political mobilization, does cause harm to natural human rights. It may do good things, but does it actually cause harm? In any way does it cause harm? And we have proved, yes, it does cause harm. There may be good things about it, but the point here is, are there bad things? And yes, there are bad things. So I feel like their stance is just put down. And then I'd like to talk about how the second speaker talked about Sri Lanka and how that was not really opposing human rights or something along those lines. Well, the war between Sri Lanka as a civil war cost so many lives of civilians. Now forget the army for now, but civilians have the right to life, and that is a basic natural right. Civilians have the right to food and water. They were deprived of that during the war. Do we not understand that this is opposing natural human rights? And thus,
When you talk about how the civilians in Sri Lanka lost so many lives, it's not because of nationalism. They chose to take part in that movement. You agree with me? So it is not nationalism's fault that they lost those. Please.
Nationalism is what started this war. So yes, on the long term, it's a knockout effect. So yes, that is what. So I feel like that point doesn't make sense. And then I'd like to state that the third speaker now, moving on, kind of contradicted himself a bit, because he talked about how Hitler was fueled by nationalism, but that was not really going to harm anyone. Hitler killed millions and millions of Jews in concentration camps, so the right to live, the right to have freedom in their own country was deprived of them. So I don't understand if the proposition actually understands the concept of human rights, because in human rights, and I will now list this, you have the right to possession of oneself. During war, so many women are raped.
Yes. Absolutely. Talking about Hitler very simply. Hitler didn't say that I'm killing Jews because I'm nationalist. Hitler said I'm killing Jews because Jews are ethnically inferior. So the deaths of Jews has nothing to do with nationalism. The fact that Hitler was in a stance to do all this because he unified the German people behind him, that was nationalism. So can you please detail that?
That's what we're saying. See, when Hitler unified the Jews, that is a form of political mobilization. That is a form of nationalism as a form of political mobilization. unified the Germans, when he unified the Germans in such a way that because the Germans were suppressed, the Germans weren't able to be unified easily, and they decided to go against the Jews. So again, like I said, it's a knock-on effect, and nationalism as a form of political mobilization was at the heart of all of this. And then they talked about how nationalism as a form of political mobilization doesn't portray, like, give genocide. It doesn't kind of provoke that in any way. I'd like to bring about a point of ISIS, all right? They said that ISIS has nothing to do with nationalism. But what started ISIS? What were the Sunni Muslims trying to do? They were trying to, not now, thank you. They were trying to establish an Islamic state for themselves. They were trying to establish a nation state for themselves. And if the people that believed in that notion that actually got involved. So this is nationalism as a form of political mobilization. It has led to deaths of nearly 170,000 people and counting. So that is genocide. And that is, not now please. That is a form of nationalism as a form of political mobilization, taking away someone's right to live, which was one of the main rights, main natural human rights, and they're taking that away. So I don't even see where they're going with that. Not now, please. And then they talked about how nationalism is defined by the people, and BJP is not allowed to define nationalism. Well, BJP is part of the people. The people that support BJP are part of the people. So you're basically contradicting yourself once again. Now, please. And then I'm not gonna provide my own stance because I've rebuked those points. So I'm gonna provide a little more constructive. Though I feel that I may have convinced you already. My first constructivism is gonna be, let's look at, not now please. Let's look at World War I, the other wars that started, for example, the Austro-Hungary War, the India-Pakistan War, World War II even, that started because of nationalism as a form of political mobilization. Now, not now please, what are the side effects of war? The side effects of war are people deprived of food, people deprived of their life, people deprived of water, people deprived of freedom and basic survival. These are all natural and human rights. People are deprived of them. That's why the opposition's point stands strong. Not now, please. And now, another point, natural human right, is the pursuit of happiness. Everyone has the right to pursue happiness. Everyone has the right to say, yes, this is what makes me happy, and that's what I'm going to do. War doesn't make lots of people happy. They don't have the right to, not now, please. Syrian refugees are being refused the right to leave their nations because of the Syrian war, which was caused by a form of nationalism as a form of political mobilization. So these refugees have been basically deprived of their right to identity, they've been deprived of their right to pursuit of happiness, they've been deprived of their right to live properly in like a confined state with the shouts of POI. Not now, please. I won't be taking any more POIs since I've addressed a few. And now, I fail to understand why the proposition seems to think that just because there's good things that nationalism as a form of political mobilization does, that there's no bad things. Where there is a good, there is a bad. And the bad has been evidently brought out to you by my opposition team. So that is why I feel that, yes, nationalism as a form of political mobilization does take away someone's natural human rights. Thank you.
Oh, my name is Loxley. I'm the fourth speaker for the opposition team. And I'd like to start off by saying that honestly, I'm trembling. My heart is beating so fast and I don't know what to do because I feel so proud to have the chance to fight to represent my nation, my beautiful culture, my India in a grand theater like this. But at the same time, I didn't come prepared. However, after seeing the three speakers from the proposition team come up and fail to understand the topic as a whole, I have so many points to say. And let me start off with my first small rebuttal. When the first speaker, as kind as she may be, earlier stated that this topic is so vague that it can't be understood perfectly. Let me tell you, it is the exact opposite. This point is so specific that there are only a few areas that we can reach into and gain examples. Not only in this room, but as the world, we can only see a few areas to get examples into. Let me, please do berate me if I keep on going about wars and genocides, but that's the truth of the situation. There are only those we can relate to. We can only see into certain points of the past where nationalism has caused a bad effect. And so this makes the first speaker's statement about it being so vague entirely redundant. It is so specific that there are only certain points we can reach to. And another statement made by the first speaker, our nation was freed on the basis of nationalism. She forgot to finish the rest of the sentence. Apology accepted. And let me finish that sentence for you. Our nation was freed on the basis of nationalism from an outside entity that was so much so built on their nationalism onto another, that they wanted to take it over to another place and basically export their nationalism, export their ideology, export their culture because they think they are the best. This is the basis of colonialism. When you think you are so amazing that you need to export your awesomeness to others who are deprived of this awesomeness. Don't believe me? And let me tell you the best part. The Indians were subsequently killed. Indians were subsequently raped by the British, taken away by the British for slavery in other countries. Notably, there's a little nice country called South Africa. Now, if any of you know South Africa, that's another country where the British exported their colonialism and their nationalism, and in both countries they have violated human rights. Noticeably worse in South Africa. We should be feeling sorry for South Africa today. Let me tell you why. I was in another competition. I saw the South African team. I did not expect it to be all white, and yet they are. An all-white South African team for a country that has long since passed apartheid. That's ridiculous. If there is no nationalism, if nationalism was not the cause of these two wars, we still wouldn't be facing places where the whites are seen as the greatest people in the world till date, or the whites exude themselves as the greatest people in the world. Nationalism is bad on many scenarios, and you cannot deny it. And a third speaker mentioned the point where if nationalism, the nationalism stopped after a time, and the real bad effects came later in terms of World War II or Hitler. Now, let me tell you, if nationalism stopped after a time as the driving force behind the German people,
30 seconds more.
then what was driving them? The answer is the third speaker is wrong. And nationalism was still driving them. Nationalism is the most potent power for any war in today's world. And I would like to summarize by saying, nationalism is an ideology that brings people together to form or continuation of a nation. So anytime someone fights to create a new nation, sometimes fights to make a new area for themselves, that's nationalism. Anytime they hurt other people, that's violation of human rights. Thank you very much.
Nationalism as a form of political mobilization does not oppose human rights. Now, what the very important part of my argument is that human rights are often clubbed together with culture, ethnicity, a specific community. Though we may have categorized human rights individually as done by the opposition, but it always works better when worked together in a community where the interests of the community are upheld, and that's what the basic concept of human rights actually is. Nationalism as a form of political mobilization brings citizens of a nation together to achieve common goals, aspirations, etc. And this is not what actually opposes natural human rights. This is what, as stated by the third speaker, causes a knockout effect, and that's what this implies, that nationalism does not as a concept in itself lead to the loss of human lives, which is a violation of natural human rights, but it does have the knockout effect which leads to this destruction. So the concept itself does not defy it, right? Further, nationalism comes from the constitution. Natural rights can only work when they come from a doctrine, and here that doctrine is the constitution. Also, ladies and gentlemen, there is a huge difference between nationalism and radicalism, which the opposition does not seem to understand. What was nationalism to Julius Caesar? For Brutus it may vary, but the concept still remains the same, right? Further, Edward Snowden, ladies and gentlemen, he said that, as you would be aware of his concept of nationalism, support for his country was letting people to know that what the government was doing is wrong. Now this is against governmental nationalism, right? But it does not oppose the idea of nationalism itself. Further, it is funny how the opposition kept on citing examples of nationalism failing its purpose to try and imply that nationalism within itself was a failed phenomena, right? When you eat beef against the will of a community, you do not become anti-nationalist. You fight fundamentalism. When you get tried for sedition, you're not getting tried by anti-nationals, but those who don't understand who a nationalist is expected to be. You refer to private organizations and organizations such as the ISIS that propagate extremism and equate this with the concept that aims to bring people together, that is nationalism. So your whole idea of the concept in itself is defected, right? Further, the opposition stated that a few examples such as the LTTE, Tamilaram in Sri Lanka, right? However, they very conveniently ignored the fact that these examples of these are examples which did not lead to nationalism, but in fact in itself defied it, right? So I'd like to conclude with saying that the first speaker talked about how Stalin and the Iron Curtain were the most prominent examples of nationalism gone wrong. However, that defines your very definition that you were trying to adhere to in your debate. Thank you.